Ryan's gut told him something was wrong long before he found the proof. Megan's smiles were too bright, her laughter too sudden, her excuses too perfect. Over the years, he had learned to recognize the patterns in her stories, to detect the subtle shifts in her tone when she was lying about something trivial. It was always about little things, shopping receipts, forgotten appointments. But this felt different. The first clue came on a Wednesday evening when Megan's phone buzzed incessantly during dinner. She glanced at the screen and flipped it over, her laughter touch too nervous. So, just work, she said, her fork stabbing at the salad on her plate. Ryan nodded, his expression neutral. He knew better than to press, not yet. He had learned patience during his years in sales. A successful pitch required timing and precision, not haste. That night, as Megan slept soundly beside him, Ryan scrolled through her recent calls on the phone she'd carelessly left charging. One number appeared over and over again. It wasn't saved in her contacts, but it was familiar. Too familiar. David, her colleague, was always around, always the center of attention at company picnics and holiday parties. His loud laugh and easy charm had grated on Ryan from the moment they met. But Megan had brushed it off. David's harmless, she had said once. He's just confident. The next day, Ryan decided to skip his usual morning run. Instead, he sat in the living room with his coffee, scrolling through Megan's social media accounts. Her profile was pristine, curated, and free of any obvious clues. But there were patterns, subtle ones, pictures where David was just out of frame, comments that told a little too personal, and tags that told stories she hadn't shared with Ryan. Still, it wasn't enough. Suspicion wasn't proof. Ryan waited until the weekend to dig deeper. While Megan was out shopping with friends, he opened her laptop. The password, a combination of their wedding date and her favorite flower, felt bitterly ironic. Her inbox was meticulous, folders for work, family, and personal messages. But she hadn't hidden everything. An email from David stood out immediately. The subject line was innocuous, quarterly presentation updates. But the content was anything but professional. Inside was a joke, a private reference Ryan didn't understand, followed by a winking emoji and a suggestion to meet for lunch again soon. There was no mistaking the tone. Ryan's chest tightened as he read it again and again, the words burning into his mind. Megan was clever, but not clever enough to cover her tracks completely. And David? His arrogance was palpable, even in pixels. He didn't confront her that night. Instead, he let his anger simmer beneath the surface, his face betraying nothing. Confrontation wasn't his style. The strategy was. Over the next few weeks, Ryan began collecting more evidence. He studied Megan's movements, tracked her locations, and subtly tested her stories for consistency. Each lie she told strengthened his resolve. Each excuse, another thread in the web she'd tangled herself in. But Ryan wasn't content to simply know the truth. He wanted David to feel the weight of it, to experience the humiliation he so carelessly dismissed in others. For Ryan, this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about justice. And so the plan began to take shape. Ryan's anger had cooled, solidifying into a resolve as unyielding as steel. He had always believed that timing and preparation could transform any situation. That belief would guide him now as he turned his betrayal into their reckoning. He spent the next few nights sketching out the plan in his mind. It wasn't enough to expose Megan and David privately. No, their downfall needed to match the scale of their arrogance, public, undeniable, and irreversible. But more than that, it needed to be precise, leaving no room for them to squirm out of accountability. The first step was information. Ryan wasn't impulsive. He knew that half-baked accusations would only give them the upper hand. He began by discreetly piecing together David's life. Late at night, in the glow of his laptop, Ryan scoured social media, company websites, and forums. He unearthed details about David's work, his family, and even his favorite local bar. Every detail was a puzzle piece, a potential weapon. But what truly sealed the plan was a discovery that seemed almost too convenient. David was preparing for a major professional milestone, a conference at which he was expected to give a keynote speech in front of the company's top brass. Megan had mentioned it in passing, calling it David's big moment. To Ryan, it was the perfect stage. The second step was infiltration. Ryan wasn't a man who made friends easily, but his charm when needed could be disarming. He started frequenting the same coffee shop David visited each morning, striking up casual conversations with him as if by coincidence. At first, the exchanges were short, comments about the weather or sports, but Ryan gradually warmed up the interaction. David, arrogant and unsuspecting, took the bait. "You seem familiar," David said one day, narrowing his eyes as they stood in line. Ryan smiled. "Probably seen me around. My wife works at your company, Megan. Heard a lot about you." David's smile faltered briefly, but quickly returned. "Ah, Megan. Yeah, she's great." "Yeah, she is," Ryan replied, his voice steady. Over the next few weeks, Ryan deepened the facade of camaraderie. He bought David drinks one evening after running into him at a bar, steering the conversation toward work and relationships. David, under the influence of beer and his own ego, became loose-lipped, offering vague but suggestive comments about his connection to Megan. "You're lucky," David said at one point, smirking. Megan said, "Something else," said the father. Ryan kept his expression neutral, filing away the comment. The third step was execution. Ryan meticulously orchestrated an event where all the pieces would fall into place. He learned that Megan and David were planning another business lunch at a high-end restaurant. This time, Ryan would be there too. Ryan made a reservation under a false name and positioned himself strategically, ensuring he had a clear line of sight to their table. He hired a private investigator to follow them as they arrived, capturing photos and videos of the pair entering the restaurant hand in hand, laughing like co-conspirators. The investigator's work was thorough, discreet, and damning. At the same time, Ryan had been preparing for the larger stage, the conference. He enlisted the help of a trusted IT professional to access the presentation software David would be using for his keynote. Ryan didn't alter the content, he didn't need to, but he ensured that incriminating photos of David and Megan, along with excerpts of their messages, were embedded into the slides, timed to appear during the height of David's speech. So everything was open law. As the day of the conference approached, Ryan ensured that Megan and David were blissfully unaware. Megan's demeanor grew more distant at home, but Ryan feigned ignorance, acting every bit the supportive husband. The plan's brilliance lay in its subtlety. Neither Megan nor David had any inkling of what awaited them. The night before the conference, Ryan sat in his living room staring at the folder of evidence he had meticulously compiled. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming his life, his dignity, and his power. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Tomorrow, he thought, everything changes. Ryan's confidence had grown as the pieces fell into place, yet he knew the execution had to be flawless. The opportunity to dismantle Megan and David's lives in one calculated move wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. As the day of the conference loomed closer, Ryan refined every detail of his plan, eliminating the slightest chance of error. The morning of the event began like any other. Megan was unusually cheerful, humming softly as she prepared for work. It was the sort of cheerfulness that might have seemed endearing once, but now it grated on Ryan. She had no idea what awaited her. Her betrayal, casual and callous, had reached its zenith, and today would mark its inevitable collapse. And number 7 ran a no alert. Megan leaned in to kiss him goodbye, her lips brushing his cheek with the same practiced ease that had once reassured him. "Wish me luck," she said, slipping her bag over her shoulder. "Oh, always," Ryan replied, masking his distaste with a warm smile. She left without another glance, and Ryan felt a sharp pang of satisfaction. By the end of the day, her charade would be over. The conference venue buzzed with activity. Business executives mingled in the lobby, exchanging pleasantries and business cards. It was an event designed for networking and showcasing talent, David's supposed strong suits. Ryan entered unnoticed, blending into the crowd with the ease of a practiced observer. His eyes scanned the room until he spotted David, who stood at the center of a small group, laughing loudly at some joke he had made. Ryan lingered near the coffee station, his phone in hand. The private investigator had delivered the final evidence earlier that morning, clear photos of Megan and David locked in a passionate embrace outside a hotel, time-stamped and damning. Ryan had uploaded the photos to a secure drive, ready to be deployed at the perfect moment. Ryan's confirmation meant Megan's sheriff's daughter, Tavar Levy, was 7 months pregnant. As the conference moved into the main hall, Ryan slipped into the back row, out of sight but with a clear view of the stage. David was set to speak in less than an hour, and Megan, predictably, had taken a seat near the front. Her posture was relaxed, her attention fixed on her phone. She was likely texting David, though Ryan doubted she'd have the nerve to do so in front of everyone. The keynote introduction began, and the crowd fell silent. The host, a senior executive at the company, extolled David's accomplishments with glowing praise, presenting him as a rising star in their industry. Ryan smirked to himself. David had no idea that his fall was imminent. And of course, a great feminist. When David took the stage, the applause was enthusiastic. He exuded confidence, his tailored suit and winning smile, giving him the air of a man in control. Megan beamed up at him, her admiration evident. Ryan's hand tightened around his phone. He felt a brief pang of anger at how easily she had dismissed their marriage, their history, but he didn't let it distract him. This wasn't the time for emotion. This was the time for action. David's presentation began smoothly. He walked the audience through his slides, his charm and charisma filling the room. The attendees nodded along, clearly impressed. Ryan's gaze flicked to the back corner, where his IT contact gave a discreet thumbs up. It was time. Within minutes, he was sitting in the galley, surveying all the boys, and asked the name of each. The interruption was subtle at first. As David transitioned to a new slide, the image of a blueprint appeared, exactly what the audience expected. But then the screen flickered. A second image overlaid the blueprint, a grainy photo of David and Megan in an intimate embrace. The audience murmured in confusion, but David kept talking, oblivious. A second slide appeared, this time showing a series of text messages between the two of them. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, turning to whispers and then audible gasps. David finally noticed, his words faltering as he glanced at the screen. His confident smile wavered. "What the?" he stammered, turning toward the projector as another image flashed on the screen. Megan laughing in a hotel room bed, her hair tousled, with David's shirt draped across the chair behind her. Panic spread across David's face. He turned back to the audience, his charm evaporating under their collective scrutiny. This is a mistake," he began, his voice shaking. "I don't know how. I don't know how." But he didn't finish. The next slide was even more damning, a detailed timeline of their affair, accompanied by expense reports that linked company funds to their rendezvous. Ryan had ensured every detail was irrefutable, leaving no room for denial. The room erupted into chaos. Attendees whispered furiously, and several began snapping photos of the screen with their phones. Megan's face, flushed and wide-eyed, betrayed her disbelief. She shrank in her seat, her composure unraveling. Caleb controlled one of his disruptive bouts. He resumed controlling. He continued to impatiently talk. Vine watched from the shadows, satisfaction washing over him. This was exactly what he'd envisioned. David's reputation crumbling in real time, Megan's betrayal exposed in front of the colleagues and acquaintances she'd worked so hard to impress. Security personnel rushed onto the stage, cutting the presentation short and escorting David away. The host apologized profusely to the audience, promising an internal investigation. Ryan slipped out of the room as chaos reigned, content that the damage was done. The fallout from Ryan's meticulously orchestrated humiliation began immediately, but the real confrontation was yet to come. Megan arrived home late that evening, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. Her face was pale, her makeup slightly smeared, as if she had tried to scrub away the stain of the day's disaster. Ryan sat in the living room, a glass of bourbon in hand, his expression unreadable. Megan hesitated at the threshold, gripping her purse tightly as she looked at him. "Ryan," she began, her voice thin and cracking, "I can explain." "Don't," Ryan interrupted. his tone quiet but firm. He set the glass down on the table with deliberate care and gestured toward the couch. Sit. Megan's eyes darted around the room. Her usual confidence evaporated. I don't know what you think. Sit, Ryan repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. She obeyed, perching on the edge of the couch like a schoolgirl summoned to the principal's office. Ryan let the silence hang between them, heavy and oppressive, until she finally spoke again. It's not what you think, Megan said, her words tumbling out in a rush. David and I, it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. A moment? Ryan's laugh was cold, almost cruel. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. I read the messages. I saw the pictures. This wasn't a moment, Megan. This was a calculated, deliberate betrayal. Megan flinched, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. I never meant to hurt you. You have to believe me. Ryan leaned back, his gaze hard. Never meant to hurt me? Megan, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed the trust we've built over 15 years. You walked into our home every night, smiled in my face, and pretended everything was fine while you carried on with him. She opened her mouth to respond, but he raised a hand to stop her. And don't even start with, it didn't mean anything. You don't send text messages like the ones I read to someone who doesn't mean anything. You don't lie to your husband for months over something trivial. Megan's lower lip trembled, but Ryan pressed on. Do you even understand what you've done? Not just to me, but to yourself, to your career, to him? He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Do you know how many people were at that conference today? How many of them have phones, social media accounts, and the means to spread what they saw? Megan buried her face in her hands. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. David said, Ryan's voice rose, sharp and cutting. David said? Of course David said. Let me guess, he said he loved you, that you were special, that he could give you what I couldn't? He shook his head, disgusted. You fell for the oldest line in the book, Megan. You were just another conquest to him. And now you've both lost everything. Megan lifted her head, her eyes wet with tears. Please, Ryan, I made a mistake. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I love you. Ryan's laugh was bitter. Love me? Megan, if you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. Love isn't sneaking around. Love isn't lies. Love isn't letting someone else into our bed, if only metaphorically. He stood, pacing the room as he tried to contain the storm of emotions roiling inside him. You're sorry now, because you got caught. If I hadn't exposed you, would you have ever told me? She didn't answer, and her silence was damning. Ryan stopped pacing and turned to face her. You know what hurts the most? It's not just the affair. It's that you thought so little of me, that you thought I wouldn't notice, or worse, that I wouldn't care. I do care, Megan cried, rising from the couch. I care about us, about our life, about everything we've built together. Please, Ryan, don't throw it all away. Don't throw it away. Ryan's voice rose. You threw it away, Megan. You did this. And now you want me to pick up the pieces and pretend everything's fine? Her tears flowed freely now, streaking her carefully applied makeup. What do you want me to say? What do you want me to do? I want you to admit it, Ryan said, his voice raw. Admit that you chose him. Admit that you cared more about your own selfish desires than about me, about us. Megan's knees buckled, and she sank back onto the couch. I don't know why I did it, she sobbed. I was stupid and selfish, and God, Ryan, I hate myself for it. For a moment, Ryan felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her deceit. He stood there, watching her cry, feeling a strange sense of detachment. Eventually, Miss Dern rose to her feet and, you should pack a bag, he said finally, his voice flat. You can stay with a friend or family. I need space. Go, Megan. He turned his back on her, unwilling to let her see the emotions threatening to break through his carefully constructed facade. Just go, he repeated. Only when she had laid my weapons aside came he celebrating. He heard her movements, hesitant at first, then hurried. The sound of her suitcase wheels against the floor felt like the punctuation mark on their shattered life. When the door clicked shut behind her, Ryan sank into the chair, his head in his hands. The confrontation was over, but the pain was just beginning. As rediscovered more of the latest machinery processing actual rodeo movement, her eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she realized what had attracted her attention. The house was eerily quiet. For the first time in years, Ryan felt the weight of the silence press down on him. Megan's departure had left an absence that was both tangible and liberating. The air seemed lighter, yet his mind was heavy with thoughts of what had transpired. He stared at the empty space on the couch where she had pleaded with him, her tears soaking the fabric, and wondered how they had arrived at such a devastating end. But regret wasn't what lingered in his mind. It was resolve. Ryan had spent months unraveling the truth, and now, with the affair exposed and Megan gone, he could finally begin to rebuild. On his terms. Terms live and did. On his terms. On his horse's terms. The next morning, Ryan awoke to a flood of notifications on his phone. Word of the scandal had spread like wildfire. Colleagues, acquaintances, even distant friends were reaching out. Some messages were laced with sympathy, others with curiosity. A few offered unsolicited advice on how to move forward. Ryan ignored them all. He had no intention of letting his life become a public spectacle beyond what was necessary. David, however, hadn't been so lucky. A quick search revealed that he had been placed on leave pending an investigation into misconduct. Ryan smirked at the irony. David, who had strutted so arrogantly, was now facing the professional implosion Ryan had engineered. Megan's reputation at her company wasn't faring much better. Gossip spread fast in professional circles, and her name was already being whispered with disdain. She had become a cautionary tale. For Ryan, the next steps were pragmatic. He contacted his lawyer to begin the divorce proceedings. The evidence he had meticulously collected ensured there would be no complications. Infidelity, public humiliation, and misuse of marital assets were all grounds for a swift resolution. Ryan's lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Claire, assured him that Megan wouldn't be walking away with much. The inspector bowed to change what he was going to do. When Claire began to speak, she asked him for her plans. The list included, "She's going to try and paint you as the villain," Claire warned. "Be ready for the emotional theatrics." Ryan chuckled dryly. "I've been ready for months. Thanks for asking, man," he replied. Though the legal process was underway, Ryan knew the real challenge lay in rediscovering himself. For years, he had defined his life around his marriage, believing it to be the foundation of his happiness. Now that foundation had crumbled, but he realized it wasn't the disaster he had feared. It was an opportunity, a chance to rebuild, stronger and smarter. He threw himself into his work, finding solace in the structure and logic of his sales career. The rhythm of meetings, negotiations, and deals offered a sense of control that had been missing from his personal life. Outside of work, he began to reconnect with old friends, people he had distanced himself from during his marriage. Their support was genuine and grounding, a reminder that life extended beyond the walls of his home. It was during one of these meetups that Ryan shared his experience, cautiously at first. To his surprise, his friends didn't look at him with pity, but with admiration. "You handled it better than most people would," one of them remarked. "Turning the tables like that? That's not just smart, it's bold." Their words resonated with Ryan. For so long, he had felt like a victim, but now he saw himself as something else entirely. A survivor, even a strategist. He had taken control of a situation that could have destroyed him and used it to expose the truth. Weeks turned into months, and the divorce finalized with little fanfare. Megan didn't contest the terms, her shame likely outweighing any desire to fight. Ryan was left with the house, his financial stability intact, and most importantly, his dignity. The final encounter with Megan came on a chilly afternoon when she returned to collect the last of her belongings. She looked different, worn, defeated. Gone was the confident woman who had once flaunted her affair as if it were her right, and it was just the beginning of a sentence. "I just want to say I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice trembling. Ryan regarded her with a calm he hadn't felt in months. "I don't need your apology, Megan. I needed your honesty, and that's something you never gave me." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. But Ryan felt no satisfaction in her pain. He realized he no longer needed her to suffer for what she had done. Her life was already in ruins. Her actions had ensured that. As she left for the final time, Ryan closed the door behind her and stood in the quiet house once more. This time, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a blank canvas. In the beginning of Tales from the Rainbow, everything was new, including the devotion that Ryan had shown for Hunter Rivera, and she had reciprocated that enduring my days watching Holtz. Over the next few months, Ryan began making changes to the house. He painted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and replaced old photographs with new artwork. The physical transformation mirrored his emotional one, a shedding of the past to embrace the future. He also began to date, cautiously at first, rediscovering what it meant to connect with someone new. The process wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Each interaction reminded him that he was more than Megan's husband, more than the man she had betrayed. He was Ryan, a man who had endured, adapted, and thrived. One evening, as he sat on his newly redecorated couch, Ryan raised a glass of bourbon to the empty room. He thought of the man he had been a year ago, naive, trusting, blind to the cracks in his marriage. That man was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid to face the future. To new beginnings, he murmured, the weight of the past finally lifting. And with that, he let it all go.